So here we have the real story of the Boston Tea Party, when in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, 600 casks of tea showed up from the British East India Company, which in 1773, with the Tea Act of 1773, had just gotten this massive tax cut so that they could put out of business the small American entrepreneurs. They could pull a Walmart on them. Resistance was organizing and growing. The Tea Act was the final straw. The citizens of the colonies were preparing to throw off one of the corporations that for almost 200 years had determined nearly every aspect of their lives in North America through its economic and political power. They were planning to destroy the goods of the world's largest multinational corporation, intimidate its employees, and face down the guns of the government that supported it. A newsletter called The Alarm circulated throughout the colonies. On May 27, 1773, signed by Rusticus, it made clear the feelings of colonial Americans about England's largest transnational corporation and their behavior around the world. This is what Rusticus wrote. This was nailed on doors and trees all over Boston. Are we in like manner to be given up to the disposal of the East India Company, who now have the assurance to step forth in aid of the minister to execute his plan of enslaving America? Their conduct in Asia for some years past has given simple proof how little they regard the laws of nations, the rights, the liberties, or lives of men. They have levied war, excited rebellions, dethroned lawful princes, and sacrificed millions for the sake of profit. The revenues of mighty kingdoms have centered in their coffers, and these not being sufficient to glut their avarice, they have, by the most unparalleled barbarities, extortions, and monopolies, stripped the miserable inhabitants of their property and reduced whole provinces to indigence and ruin. 1,500,000, it is said, perished by famine in 1 year, not because the earth denied its fruits, but because this corporation and their servants engulfed all of the necessities of life and set them at so high a price that the poor could not purchase them. End of quote. After turning back the company's ships in Philadelphia and New York, Hughes, George Robert Twelvetree Hughes, the only survivor of the Boston Tea Party who actually wrote the story of what happened, wrote in this little book of his that I have a copy of. In fact, we're showing a picture of it on the screen. He wrote, "In Boston, the general voice declared the time was come to face the storm." Rusticus added his voice in a 1773 pamphlet saying, "Resolved, therefore, nobly resolved, and publish to the world your resolutions, that no man will receive the tea, no man will let his stores or suffer the vessel that brings it to moor at his wharf, and that if any person assists at unloading, landing, or storing it, he shall ever be deemed an enemy to his country, and but never be employed by his fellow citizens." People were getting upset. Colonial voices were getting louder and louder about their outrage at this giant corporation's behavior. Another issue, the Alarm, signed and dated October 27, 1773, said, "It hath now been proved to you that the East India Company obtained the monopoly of that trade of tea by bribery and corruption, that the power thus obtained they have prostituted to extortion and other the most cruel and horrible purposes the sun ever beheld." And then, says Hughes, on a cold November evening, the first of the East India Company's ships of reduced tax tea arrived in Boston Harbor. On the 28th of November, 1773, the ship Dartmouth with 112 chests arrived, and the next morning after, the following notice was widely circulated: "Friends, brethren, country, the worst of plagues, the detested tea, has arrived in this harbor. The hour of destruction, a manly opposition to the machinations of tyranny, stares you in the face. Many Americans today believe that the colonists were upset. Many Americans today believe that the colonists were upset because they didn't have a legislature that they had elected that would pass the laws under which they were taxed. Thus, taxation without representation was their rallying cry." And while that was true, Hughes points out that the thorn in their side, the pinprick that was really driving their rage, was that England was passing tax laws for the benefit of a transnational corporation, the East India Company, at the expense of the average American worker and America's small business owners. Thus, taxation without representation also meant hitting the average person in small business with taxes, while letting the richest and most powerful corporation in the world off the hook for its taxes. It was government sponsorship of one corporation over all competitors, plain and simple. And here now today, we have ExxonMobil, the most profitable corporation in the history of the world, paying no income tax in the United States. General Electric, huge profit, no income tax in the United States. Corporations manufacturing things offshore and keeping all their money offshore. I mean, it's... So anyway, I just wanted it to be on the record. I wanted you to know the true history of the Boston Tea Party. The first Tea Party was a revolt against transnational corporate power and against government tax cuts, tax breaks for a transnational corporation that the stock of which was largely owned by the British aristocracy, the same people who were in the government. It is eerily similar to today, but today's Tea Partiers somehow have the story upside down. They don't get it. That the Boston Tea Party was a challenge. It was the first of the anti-WTO protests, in essence. So, anyway, for the record, let's pick up some phone calls here. Don in Half Moon Bay, California. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Yeah, well, you answered some of my questions. In the beginning of the corporation, the royal family was the major stockholders.
Yeah, in 1601, when Queen Elizabeth chartered the East India Company, the stockholders were almost exclusively the royal family and members of the House of Lords.
So I guess the corporation, when it was first dreamed up by the super rich of the royal families, because the phony royal bloodline didn't work anymore.
Well, I can tell you the Golden Hind, Sir Francis Drake's ship, was the first incorporated venture that the first modern-day corporation, and this was in 92 or something like that. This was before 1600, about a decade before 1600, and it was a risk. This guy was going to travel around the globe and explore and find resources, and the English were trying to get into the act because, Columbus back 100 years earlier, 1492, was bringing back all kinds of slaves and wood and goodies from North America, and then the Spanish got into it in big, looting and pillaging gold from Central and South America, and so this was the British attempt to get into it, and what they wanted to do was bring together enough wealth that they could finance Sir Francis Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, and yet have a limit of liability to the stockholders, both for any action he took, in other words, if he started a war someplace, and also so that if he lost more money than they invested, they wouldn't be on the hook for it. And so that's what Queen Elizabeth did when she incorporated the Golden Hind, and she got a 5,000% return on her investment, and that led her to start the East India Company in 1601. So that's the history. By the way, this is all laid out in my book, Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. It's also, I believe, in my book, What Would Jefferson Do? And, it's no secret, and you can find a lot of this in articles and many of the writings of Hughes, for example, on our website over at thomhartmann.com, just as an FYI.